Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. I never thought I'd sit down to share this, but here I am, and it feels as though I need to speak it out loud, if only to understand it myself. My name is Margaret, I'm 52, and for most of my life, I thought I knew my son as well as anyone could know their child. But lately, I don't know. I feel confused, and I think it's time I trace back to when everything started feeling so different. It was a Thursday afternoon in late March. The sunlight streamed through the living room windows, cutting across the hardwood floors in sharp golden lines. I had my cup of coffee in hand, the warmth radiating through my fingers, and I sat on the couch watching him. Nathan was sitting cross-legged on the rug, absorbed in a sketchbook, pencil moving rapidly across the pages. For a moment, I just watched him, the boy I had raised, now a man of 25, so calm and yet so distant at times. I remembered holding him as a newborn, marveling at how tiny and perfect he was, and now here he was, larger than me, utterly absorbed in his own world. "Mom," he said suddenly, not looking up, "do you think people ever really change?" I blinked, startled. It wasn't a question I was expecting. I sipped my coffee carefully, thinking, I think people change, Nathan, but sometimes the parts of them we wish would, don't. Why? He finally looked up at me then, eyes shadowed, like he had been carrying a thought too heavy for words until that moment. I don't know. I just feel stuck sometimes. Like I'm trying to figure out who I am, but I don't have the right map. His voice was quiet but intense, almost trembling. I set my cup down, leaning forward. Nathan, you've always been thoughtful. You've always asked questions others don't even notice exist. But you don't have to do it alone. You have me. Always. He nodded, and I could see his hands clenching and unclenching, a subtle sign of the anxiety I sometimes forget still resides in him. It made me ache, knowing that my son, the young man I had guided through scraped knees and heartbreaks alike, was wrestling with this invisible weight I couldn't just fix with a hug. We talked like that for a long time. Not about solutions, not about judgment, but just talking, really talking, as we used to when he was a boy and I would read bedtime stories, and he'd ask questions about the stars that kept me up late into the night. We went from discussing his job frustrations to his friendships to the quiet loneliness he sometimes felt despite being surrounded by people. And slowly, the tension in his shoulders eased, the weight in his voice softened, like sharing it had pulled some of it out of him. But then came the moment that truly confused me. He paused and said, "Mom, do you think I make the right choices?" I blinked. "Nathan, you make your choices with care, with thought. That's all any of us can do. Why do you ask?" His eyes were fixed on the floor, and then he laughed softly, a sound that carried both relief and sadness. "Because I keep questioning them, even the ones I thought were obvious. And I don't want to disappoint you or anyone." I reached for his hand. "Nathan, the only thing I want is for you to be honest with yourself. Not to please me, not to please anyone else. Your life is yours, and yes, you might stumble, that's inevitable. But it's also how you discover who you really are." He squeezed my hand back, and we sat like that for a long time, the room quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional bird outside. I realized then that my confusion wasn't about him. It was about me. I had always been so sure, so confident that I knew the path he would take, the way he would grow, the choices he would make. And now I was learning that part of loving someone is accepting that you don't have all the answers. Later, as I watched him return to his sketching, I noticed the sunlight catching the fine hairs on his arms, the soft curve of his brow, the gentle rise and fall of his chest. He looked so much like himself, yet I knew he was becoming someone I couldn't fully predict. And in that, I found a strange sort of peace, a realization that confusion wasn't failure. It was the space in which understanding could grow, if I let it. That night, after Nathan had gone to his room and the house was quiet, I lingered by the window, looking out at the neighborhood blanketed in early spring twilight. I thought about the years behind us, the challenges, the laughter, the moments of worry and pride. And I thought about the years ahead, uncertain and uncharted. My heart felt full, and for the first time in a long time, I embraced the confusion not as a threat, but as a sign that life was still alive, still moving, still unfolding, because in the end, I realized that loving someone deeply isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about staying present, staying connected, and letting the shared moments, the quiet, the heavy, the joyful, guide you both toward understanding. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important lesson of all. The next day, I made a point of telling him how proud I was, not of his grades, his job, or even his drawings, but of the way he was facing himself, his doubts, and his questions. And as he smiled at me, small and private, I knew that this moment, our conversation, our honesty, our shared reflection, would stay with me for the rest of my life. The morning after our long conversation, the air in the house felt different, lighter, yet charged with the lingering weight of unspoken thoughts. Nathan was already in the kitchen when I came down, wearing that same quiet intensity that made me both proud and worried. He was making breakfast, the scent of coffee and toasted bread weaving through the room, grounding me in the ordinary while my mind kept replaying our talk from yesterday. He glanced up and smiled, a brief, fleeting thing that tugged at something in my chest. "Morning, Mom. Sleep okay?" I nodded, pouring myself some coffee. "As well as I could, after everything we talked about. How about you?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes fully, but I could tell he was still processing. "I slept, I guess. It's weird, thinking so much doesn't always let you rest properly." I leaned against the counter, studying him without trying to hide it. There was a tension in his jaw I had never noticed before, a subtle tightening around his eyes, like he was holding back more than just words. And for the first time, I understood that my confusion about him wasn't simply because of his choices or behavior. It was because I was realizing that the person I thought I knew, the confident, thoughtful, careful Nathan, was still discovering himself, day by day, inside these walls and beyond them. "Mom," he said suddenly, turning to face me more fully, "can I ask you something personal?" I smiled gently. "Of course, Nathan. Always." He hesitated, the pencil of indecision hovering over his words like a fragile bridge. "Do you ever regret not knowing how to handle me better? When I was younger? Or being too protective, maybe?" The question hit me like a small, deliberate wave. I thought of the countless nights I had spent awake, worrying, trying to shield him from hurt while letting him grow on his own. I remembered his scraped knees, the heartbreaks, the whispered fears he confided in me about friends, school, and the larger world. "No," I said finally, my voice soft but certain. "I don't regret trying my best. You were always strong, Nathan, even when I thought you weren't. And yes, maybe I made mistakes, but they weren't from a lack of love. They were from learning along with you." His eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. "I guess. I just keep wondering if I'm learning fast enough. Or doing enough. Or if I'll ever figure myself out." I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Nathan, life isn't about having everything figured out. It's about being brave enough to keep asking, to keep learning, and to keep facing yourself honestly. That's how people grow. And you're doing exactly that." He exhaled, a sound that seemed to release more than just air, an invisible tension, perhaps fear, perhaps doubt. And as he smiled then, small and unguarded, I realized that part of my confusion, my worry, wasn't about him being distant or unknowable. It was about accepting that my role had shifted. I wasn't the protector of his childhood anymore. I was a partner in witnessing his growth as a man, as a human being navigating a complex world. Later that day, I found him sitting on the porch, sketchbook open but untouched. The late afternoon sunlight painted the wooden floor in warm streaks. I joined him quietly, letting the sound of the wind through the trees fill the space between us. "You know," I said after a while, "I used to think I had all the answers. Or at least, that I should." He glanced at me. "And now? Now I know that part of loving someone, really loving them, is being okay with not knowing everything. Sometimes it's about showing up, listening, and respecting the space they need to find themselves. Even when it's confusing." He looked down at his lap, then back at me, a mixture of relief and surprise on his face. That makes sense. I never thought of it that way." We stayed like that until the sun dipped below the horizon, the air cooling but the connection between us warming, settling into a quiet, profound understanding. I realized that this confusion, the tension, the uncertainty wasn't a sign of failure. It was a living proof that we were both evolving, that we were both willing to face the questions, the doubts, and the moments that scare us, Together. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, I felt a shift in myself. I felt gratitude for this journey with Nathan, for the chance to witness his honesty, his struggle, and his growth. I understood that life didn't offer neat conclusions or perfect understanding, only moments of clarity, fleeting but precious, that we could hold on to and learn from. And in that evening quiet, I made a promise to myself to continue walking beside him, not as a guide with all the answers, but as a witness to his life, with respect, patience, and unconditional love, because in this space of uncertainty, I realized, real connection lives. The days that followed were quieter than usual, filled with subtle shifts that I could sense more than see. Nathan seemed both closer and further away at the same time, like a gentle tide pulling in one moment and retreating the next. I found myself watching him, trying to understand these nuances, while also realizing that perhaps understanding everything wasn't the point anymore. One evening, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard him moving around upstairs. The house was silent, almost too quiet, and I felt that familiar tug of concern, that instinctive urge to check on him. But this time, I paused, taking a deep breath, reminding myself that part of growing up is making space for independence. Instead of rushing upstairs, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the table, letting the quiet sink in. A few minutes later, he came down, carrying a small box with sketches spilling out of it. He hesitated, then said, "Mom, can you look at these?" I nodded, gesturing for him to place the box on the table. One by one, he pulled out the sketches, each one revealing something I had never seen before, lines of raw emotion, abstract shapes, shadows, and light that spoke of his inner conflicts. There was fear, longing, curiosity, and even a certain vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. "These are incredible, Nathan," I said softly, my fingers brushing over the paper. "You've captured so much of yourself, of your world." He looked down, biting his lip, and I realized he was searching for approval, for validation, but also afraid of judgment. "I don't know if they're good enough," he admitted. "They're perfect because they're honest," I said firmly. "Art isn't about being perfect. It's about expression, about truth. And these are yours. All of yours." He smiled faintly, a small light in the shadow of uncertainty that sometimes clouded his face. And then, unexpectedly, he asked, "Do you ever feel like you don't recognize me? Like sometimes I'm someone you don't fully understand?" The question stopped me cold. I had thought a lot about our conversations, about my confusion, but hearing it put into words like that struck a chord deep in my chest. "Nathan," I said slowly, choosing my words with care, "sometimes, yes. I feel that way. But that doesn't mean I love you any less, or that I don't see you. It means you're growing, and that growth can feel strange, even to me. And that's okay." He looked at me, a flicker of relief crossing his features. "So, it's normal." "More than normal," I said, reaching for his hand. "It's life. And it's beautiful, even when it's confusing. The part that matters is that we keep talking, keep sharing, keep being present with each other." We sat together then, hand in hand, the sketches spread across the table like fragments of his thoughts made tangible. I realized that these moments, these pauses, these revelations were where true connection lived. Not in perfection or certainty, but in presence and mutual respect. Later, after he returned to his room, I lingered in the kitchen, thinking about the past and the future. I remembered the nights when he was small and scared of the dark, when I would stay by his side until he fell asleep. And I thought about now, when he was grown, navigating fears and uncertainties that I couldn't solve for him, only witness with love. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street, the faint glow of streetlights reflecting off the pavement. In that reflection, I saw not just the physical world, but the emotional landscape we were navigating together, moments of doubt, sparks of clarity, and the constant thread of connection that bound us. And I understood, more deeply than ever, that confusion wasn't a flaw, it was a doorway. A doorway to understanding, to growth, to seeing each other in ways that went beyond words or explanations. Nathan and I were stepping through it together, cautiously, vulnerably, but with an unspoken commitment to stay present with one another. As night fell and the house settled into its familiar rhythm of quiet, I felt a sense of calm. My heart was full, not with certainty, but with acceptance. Acceptance that love is not about having all the answers, but about showing up, listening, and allowing each other the space to grow. And in that space, I realized, was where the true meaning of family and connection resides, a place of patience, understanding, and enduring respect. Tomorrow, I thought, we would continue to navigate this journey. And somehow, despite all the confusion, I knew we would do it together, one honest conversation, one shared silence at a time. The next morning, a soft drizzle coated the neighborhood in a quiet, reflective gray. I stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee, the steam rising into the cool air, and I found Nathan already there, standing with his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, looking out at the wet pavement. There was a stillness about him that made me pause, sensing that this day might unfold differently. Morning, I said softly, settling into the chair across from him. He nodded, not immediately speaking. After a few moments, he finally asked, "Mom, do you ever think about how we end up being the people we are?" I considered the question, letting the rhythm of the falling rain guide my thoughts. "All the time," I said. "Every choice, every mistake, every moment shapes us. But sometimes it's not until we look back that we see the full picture." He glanced at me, his expression curious yet tentative. "I feel like I've been looking back a lot lately, trying to understand myself, the choices I've made. But sometimes I can't tell if I'm proud or disappointed." I reached over and touched his arm gently. "Nathan, being unsure doesn't mean failure. It means awareness. It means you're paying attention to yourself and your life. That's how growth begins." We stayed like that, listening to the rain tapping against the roof, sharing the silence that carried more weight than any words could. And then, slowly, he began to open up. He spoke about fears he hadn't shared before, about feeling adrift in his career, about relationships that had faltered, about the pressure he put on himself to succeed. Each confession felt like a fragile bridge being built between us, connecting our hearts in ways that were at once delicate and strong. That I listened, offering guidance not through directives, but through reflection and empathy. I shared small pieces of my own life, the moments when I had felt uncertain, lost, or afraid, letting him see that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was part of being human. And as he listened, I saw his walls slowly lowering, the guardedness that had sometimes made me feel distant beginning to soften. At one point, he paused and looked directly at me, his eyes glistening. I think I've been afraid of disappointing you. But now I realize that being honest, even when it's hard, matters more than being perfect." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I reached out to squeeze his hand. "Nathan, you could never disappoint me by being yourself. That's what I love, your honesty, your courage, your willingness to face yourself. That's what matters." The afternoon light shifted, filtering through the clouds in golden streaks that made the raindrops on the porch railing sparkle. In that quiet, illuminated moment, I felt a profound sense of understanding. My confusion about him, the questions I had carried, the uncertainty I had felt, had transformed into clarity. Not clarity in the sense of knowing everything, but clarity in recognizing the depth of his heart, his struggle, and his journey. We spent the rest of the day together, talking and laughing, sharing small stories from our past and dreaming aloud about possibilities for the future. It wasn't a day of monumental revelations or dramatic resolutions. It was quieter, subtler, but infinitely more powerful. The emotional connection between us had deepened, founded not on certainty, but on presence, respect, and mutual discovery. As night fell, I watched him return to his room, the soft glow of his desk lamp spilling out through the doorway. I lingered on the porch for a while, feeling the damp air on my skin, reflecting on the journey we had shared. I realized that confusion, fear, and uncertainty weren't obstacles, they were part of the landscape of real relationships. They were the spaces in which understanding, empathy, and love could grow, often in ways far richer than certainty ever could. Before heading inside, I whispered into the night, almost to myself, "Thank you, Nathan, for trusting me, for letting me walk this path with you." And I knew, as I turned toward the warm light of the house, that this journey, the sharing of doubts, the honest conversations, the quiet yet profound moments, would stay with me forever. Our relationship had shifted, evolved, and deepened. And though confusion might come again, I had learned that with openness, patience, and mutual respect, it could become a bridge rather than a barrier, a bridge leading to understanding, growth, and a connection that would endure through all the uncertainties life could bring. In the end, I realized that loving someone doesn't mean having all the answers. It means being present, being willing to learn alongside them, and embracing the unknown with courage. And that is exactly what Nathan and I had done, together, on this ordinary yet extraordinary day.